Thank you, Daniel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Wright. I am the Vice President for the Black Student Network, the Vice President for Academic Affairs. And on behalf of the BSN, I just want to thank you all for coming. Of course, it's the purpose of BSN to create opportunities for networking that enhance our professional development and also to promote scholastic achievement for people of color. So again, on behalf of BSN, I want to thank you all for coming. It's also my pleasure to serve as the chair for the Conference Planning Committee for the Diversity and Research and Practice Conference to be held here at Teachers College on May 3rd. The conference committee, I think we just want you to know that this is intended to be a space that opens up conversation, dialogue, and intellectual exchange. We hope that in addition to tonight, you'll continue those conversations throughout the month of April and join us on May 3rd. For your convenience, we've got some computers lined up over here with the conference pulled up on it, so feel free to check out our website there and register for the conference if you've not already done that. If you have any other questions, feel free to check in with me. Feel free to check in with any of the planners of this event or the conference steering committee. Can you raise your hand, people? And Tamika is also one of our conference planners.
I'll just stand.
And then finally, I think I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Amanda Washington and Daniel Harris who put together the event tonight. They've been working hard to do this, and they're also going to be the facilitators for tonight's discussion. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Amanda and Daniel to start the program.
Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you everyone for being here. Again, my name is Amanda Washington. I am a first-year master's student here in the Education Policy program. It's really exciting to see everyone out here tonight. The discussion that we're having is really raising our consciousness, and it's birthed really from an idea of Ivory Tolson's 9 myths of African American males in education. And so, as Ivory Tolson says, he was reading a newspaper one day and he was infuriated because as he was reading, he saw that there were so many myths, so many rumors, so many untruths of African American males and things that were going on within the academic space and how Black males are seen in academia. K-12, college, higher ed, in a lot of different spaces, he was very upset with the way that article presented and portrayed African American males. So in that same vein, we're going to be talking about Ivory Tolson's 9 myths about Black males and academic success. This is meant to be a very informal discussion. It's meant to be a very engaging, a very provocative, and a very inspirational discussion. And so our hope is that you take this discussion and then you go out to your communities and your practitioners, whatever you do, whatever, if you're a teacher, if you're a student, if you're an advocate for educational excellence, take this conversation and don't leave this conversation here. Take it out into your communities and bring it back with you when you come back to the conference on May 3rd. Thank you.
Again, my name is Daniel Harris, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you today to really talk about one of the issues that are really circulating the internet that was on MSNBC recently, that is really part of our social milieu and sometimes really part of our status quo. And that is the idea that Black men, Black boys, aren't equipped or prepared to handle academic success, and that they have a negative pathology to education as a whole. And there's a lot of reasons that we have in a society thought about why this is true. We've pointed to our culture, Black culture, we pointed to families, we pointed to poverty, crime, but the truth of the matter is that these pathologies that we've come very accustomed to have really hurt our young men and hurt them in ways that we find it almost deadly even, right? And I really think there's almost 3 deaths, I would say, that Black boys and Black men experience growing up. I know for me, in my story, I think that as a Black male growing up in this space, I had to been able to overcome many obstacles and many different things that have affected me, whether it was subconscious, unconscious, or right in front of me overtly. And one of those things that I think that happens when young boys enter formal schooling is that they aren't prepared necessarily by their parents, by their teachers, by their communities in order to really be successful. And I think it's a part of our society that has allowed this to happen. And I think that with the whole idea, the whole concept that black boys aren't able to perform as high on academic standards as other boys or as other students have really become a glaring issue in our society. And a lot of times we attribute it to achievement gaps. We look at it and it's kind of an identifier of underperformance or lack of performance, right? And I think that is the first step that we have for young boys. Because when we use high stakes tests often in standardized testing to illuminate some of the differences in student achievement, we don't give too much credence as to why we see those differences in young men and young boys. A lot of times interventions aren't put in place in order to help young boys get to a better place. A lot of times those identifiers are just monikers of why this happens over time, and we kind of accept it as part of the educational landscape. And I think that's a tragedy. Because I think what happens after that is that young boys then go into their community without the proper preparation academically, without the proper understanding of how to engage in civil duties appropriately. And I think that's the second gap that we have, only because in our society, we find that when students don't achieve high academic success or academic achievement, and then they aren't able to engage in the community in a way that's productive, a lot of times they're targeted for criminal behavior. They're put in more poverty-stricken areas. Concentrations of poverty have been a mass within the black community. And I believe that that's where young black boys then aren't able really to tap into their full potential. They aren't able to really engage in the life that they really want to. And then we have a lot of times criminalization where they're targeted for criminal behavior and then they're punished harsher than any other person in America. They have longer sentences, but a lot of times these young black boys die, literally. And I think that's the third death. And it's really tough as a black male to really see this process happening over time, that they're not prepared academically, and then they don't have the tools in order to engage in the community, and then they actually are targeted for negative behaviors, and that oftentimes leads to deaths. So that brings me to our icebreaker. So we want to get you moving. You don't want to hear me talk. I want to hear your ideas, and I want to know what expertise you guys have in the room in order to bring to light what are the myths about black boys and how we can change that narrative into opportunities of potential for our young black males instead of opportunities for degradation. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about the icebreaker. You will receive a puzzle piece. And the puzzle piece is, so if you don't have it already, you will have one very shortly. So the puzzle piece is threefold. One, you're going to have an individual who has experienced one of the deaths that I've been talking about, a literal death actually. And then another piece is going to be their story. So we're going to ask you to find, if you have a person's name, we're going to ask you to find that story. If you have a story, we ask you to find the person who that story relates to. And oftentimes we have some household names, of course, that you will find, but there's some who've gone under the radar that I think we need to bring to light. And I think that we need to really use their stories as a way of building a better way forward. And then the third piece is a myth. So if you have a myth, why don't you try to engage in how that came about, where it originated from. And I believe that's the purpose of us being here today, to really combat some of the negative narratives that have really spoiled our perspective of young black youth. So we're going to give you 5 minutes to try to find your puzzle piece, if you will. And if you don't have a puzzle piece necessarily, you could still engage in the conversation. So we'll give you 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll be able to share our afterwards.
And then also so you don't have actually a myth on your puzzle piece, but you do have the handout of all of the myths. And so as you find your puzzle piece and your puzzle piece partner finds you, and you put the pieces together of the stories of the young men, go ahead and look at that sheet, look at some of those myths, and really try to internalize with your group if those are myths that you've fallen into and that you've thought about, or if those are myths that you've already known don't exist within our community.
Okay, yes. For clarity, so are we supposed to get up?
Get up. Get up.
All the
Yes,
way
move
down.
around. You gotta find your puzzle. You only hear on a piece of a whole. Get to know someone.
So each one has 4 pieces? There you are. I'm
We were waiting. Celebratory thing, right? I see Florida. Zimmerman. Just looking for the I'm
As a matter of fact, all his parents were not
actually this young, innocent child that was really like big, gang, like thug guy.
suspensions and things they made. Sometimes you have to consider them high school or
And like kind of reinforcing that trope of the young black male, you know, the finding, I mean, kind of like pulling at straws, you know, any other, or if they, or if it was a white kid, you know, when they found all those things, you know, normal teenage behavior.
Help like disseminate that stereotype of teenager identity or comparing Justin Bieber to whereas like
Look very, very engaged. Even more engaged than we already
For example,
purposely underachieved because they associate being part of acting right, and maybe stretching that a little bit, but again, in terms of how he was written that night, in terms of how the media was reading him, in terms of like, statements, yes, I mean, having suspensions, but nothing out of the ordinary than other students, you know, not acting right, but very
pregnancy, you can kind of link that to coming from parents
A gentleman was, yes.
So as you all are getting back to your seats, we just want to reiterate the point that we think that we would be remiss if we didn't open up the conversation talking about some of the severe implications of these myths that permeate our society. And so all of the stories that you all have talked about, the narratives of all of these boys' lives, have been specifically addressing one of the most severe implications. Okay, and so we'll just go through each one of the stories that we've heard. Did everyone find their group? Okay, I know it's a little difficult and it's a little hot, but at least we're up, we know each other a little more. So let's go with the first story. The first story that we put together is Jordan Davis. Can one representative from Jordan Davis's group just kind of talk within maybe about 1 minute about what you all talked about, the implications of maybe myths in education, if there are any in Jordan Davis's story. Right before you all start, I'm sorry. I recently went to a conference. I went and I heard Jordan Davis's mother speak. She was I mean, it was phenomenal. She talked about how she homeschooled Jordan. She talked about how Jordan was a very studious student. A lot of the stories that we hear in the news don't give any indication that Jordan Davis was a scholar. And so I think that that's really important. So if Jordan Davis's group wouldn't mind standing up, maybe one person, two persons, and just talking about what you all discussed.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Krista. We're Pew and Dominant, and we totally recall this, and we also thought, and I'll talk to the first myth, which was number 3. The Black youth of today are more violent than their generations in history. So we're talking about how the gentleman went to his car and kind of like almost antagonized him, thinking that they were more violent. But we thought that there was more than one myth in play here, and so I'll let her speak to that.
Also looked at black men are a dying breed. So this whole concept and idea that you have this young man with a group of friends who I guess they presumed was dangerous, or the stereotype that they have the music blasting out, these are young thugs, and Dunn felt as though he could go antagonize them. And also, as one of my other group members mentioned, he felt a sense of power or privilege that he could approach them because he was armed, and that he could make this move against them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's move to the next story. Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin's story.
Anything that surprised you, maybe? I know we know a lot about Trayvon Martin, and there was a recent conference here. It was really good if you were able to attend it. So if you could just share out something that you thought was interesting or a connection with the myth, that'd be awesome.
So surprisingly, our group I think had echoed a lot of what they just spoke. So it was Emily, Lewis, and Shakira and I. And we kind of looked at number 3 in terms of wanting to present Trayvon as this violent, aggressive youth who had this coming to him, or essentially, or how the media for the myth about students purposely underachieving, that Trayvon had a history of behavior and suspensions, and so ways to help validate his behavior and maybe try to cast him in a darker light of being the aggressor. And then we talked a little bit about that associating with being white, just because I identify as a white man. I said that I feel in my community, in the communities that I'm in, people like to start conversations about people of color with, oh, they're so well spoken, and this person was really articulate. And I feel like they try to make those connections to education and race.
I think that's an important point to underscore, if I can just for a moment. I think there's a perception too that we carry, that there's a perception of black males as coming from the other, whether it's a majority group or a dominating group. But a lot of times, and I'll speak to the elephant in the room, that we have, me being a person of color, have the same perceptions of other black boys as well, particularly with Trayvon Martin with the hoodie. Perhaps I would have thought he was a threat as well if I'm walking down the street by myself. And his persona perhaps comes off as threatening. And to your point, I think though, is with these ideas that we can use social media, we could use the internet, we could use movies, we could use all these social epithets to really push this narrative that the black boy is aggressive, is a threat to the community. I think that's really important. Thank you for sharing that.
I think just a quick thing we kind of touched on, but just something I was thinking about in terms of media representations, but then also kind of in this age of the internet and specifically social media,
yes,
just how that's changing how these narratives get spun. And I think in positive and negative ways, I think it complicates it in some ways because of information that can go viral that's not necessarily verified, but at the same time, also kind of like this on-the-ground activist-esque type of movement that happens among people in social media networks and with hashtags on Twitter and all of that stuff, that there can be so much more of a conversation. It's not just kind of this ivory tower of media,
yes,
of CNN versus Fox, you know, producing these stories. So I think it's just interesting with this and the Davis case as well.
Definitely. As we move forward to the next one, I just want everyone to think about some solutions to some of the things that we bring up as we talk about these young men, then get into the myths. Sean Bell. may not be as familiar with Sean Bell's story. If you don't have his story, it's there on the screen so we can follow along. If the group can just share out something that maybe alarmed you or that was surprising. Anybody from the group? Did someone have Sean Bell? Show of hands. No one has Sean Bell? Okay, that's fine. Well, as you see his story there, that's what a group would have seen already. So what are your instant reactions? What's the first thought that pops into your mind?
50 shots.
50 rounds.
50 rounds. Wow.
The night before he was getting married.
Right. Can you say more about that? Why does that stand out to you?
Why does it stand? It was the night before he was getting married.
Right.
He had a young child.
Right.
And he also was a good friend of my secretary when I was a principal here in Harlem. So it was, we were devastated.
Wow.
I think to your point, that goes when Black boys are at a natural disadvantage because most are from single parent households. Let's talk about the narrative of the Black family. And so thank you very much for bringing that up. The fact that this man was about to get married, he was about to establish a family. A lot of times in the media and otherwise, we are messaged that African Americans do not have strong Black families or strong networks of support around them, but that was not the case with Bell.
And he had a very strong network around him.
So I was living in Queens when this happened, and the main thing that stood out to me was how confused everybody was because it was so obvious that they were going to find somebody guilty, and they found none of the cops guilty.
Right.
So everybody in Queens was just, I mean, not just Queens, but everybody was confused. It happened not too far from where I was living, and so the news spread quickly. We were just all confused and like, how could this happen?
So glad you brought it up. I think that's very critical because with all these young men, you will see that there's been a lot less atone for life, for loss of life. So not that necessarily that I want someone to be locked up for the rest of their life for something that's happened, but I think there should be a medium of justice that's necessary for us to be recognized as full persons in this society. So I really think that's key that you brought it up. Thank you.
I mean, I think that speaks to the Black man and their subconscious though. So, you're walking around and then you're, not you, but a Black man might feel that they aren't of worth, and then how do they show up in the community or in their family or at school? So I think that this really lends to that.
Thank you.
Molly Graham. Did we have a group?
You just lost that question, right?
I'm sorry?
You just lost that question.
First ask the question.
First ask the question.
If there was a group.
Oh, you're right.
Was there a group?
There was a group. There was a group from Marley Graham. I didn't want to speak up because I don't want to take up a lot of space in the discussion. But so this was someone that I hadn't heard about his story. But again, I think that it demonstrates a lot of those common themes of just assuming that a Black man would be dangerous. And also sort of making a connection between perhaps one type of crime and another type of crime. That if he had this type of object, and in this case drugs, that you would expect him to also have an accompanying source of protection, or that you would expect him to have a gun, which is sort of going down this sort of spiral of making more and more assumptions based on other stereotypes that you have about certain people, about Black people.
Sure.
Alan, please. Was there a group?
Yes. There was a couple of, just based on the bullet points. One, it states that he was allegedly armed. Another, that he was allegedly involved in a drug deal. Another was he allegedly had some aggressive action towards the police officer. The last bullet point or paragraph, the family describes the family's case and states that he was unarmed and he was not a serious threat to the officer. One of the things that was briefly discussed, or at least came out based on what we're looking at, the open item, or one thing that wasn't addressed, at least in the bullet point by the family, was about the alleged drug deal. So presumed guilty without, reasonable cause. There's a couple of things that's against the young man. Obviously, he has no recourse now because he's dead. Also, it was raised that where was he shot? Was he shot from the front? Was he shot from the behind? What position did that occur? Also, that there were no charges brought against the officer. Can any of the other brothers chime in, attest to the document?
Well, like the other profiles, this confirms what's been happening in the cycle of how African American men are viewed. So, and just in the fact that it's state sanctioned, that the district attorney did not pursue charges against. So it's a write-off in terms of black life. So it just really confirmed what we've been talking about.
Yes, it also made reference to the point that everybody said earlier where he's assumed to be violent. So he ended up getting shot.
And on top of that, this happened in Oakland, California, which historically has a history of a negative type of interaction between law enforcement and communities of color out there. So again, we don't have all of the nuts and bolts to justify the bullet points, but those are some things that came out in our brief, in our circle, based on what we were given.
One thing that I just want to point out as we move forward is that if you notice the ages of these young men, they all could have been here today. And that's the reality of it. And that's something that we want to really consider and think about as we try to find a way to change this narrative and really give students, young men of color, an opportunity to really succeed academically so they could be in this conversation and not be talked about in this conversation.
Oh, that's Andrew. Once again, San Francisco, police shot him after he didn't pay his train fare. 9 shots were fired. He died, and there are layers to stories and to mis-storytelling. I feel like that because they say 9 shots were returned, they say 15 shot. They say that they couldn't find the gun that he supposedly had in his possession, but then later retrieved the gun, and it was linked to the death of a pregnant teen. And again, that layer of violence being spun into the story, so that surely he must have done other things, and this is why it was okay for us to shoot him. And then with that kind of justification on the law, like why it's okay to be killing our young boys. And because of that supposed understanding of being violent and being uncivil and being unhuman, and all of those layers that we work with. And then it was interesting also that they say that he was lying there critically wounded and leading to death, and there was no care that came. And so once again, the layers of failing the system, how the system has failed this young man. And yeah, I mean, very similar to all of the other stories that are told. And it seems like it's such a repetitive narrative. We see it all the time. And what are the narratives? My question, I think, is what are the narratives that we have against it? What are the anti-talks that we have? What are the anti-actions?
I appreciate that point, and thank you. And so the reason why we have so many of these stories is because we wanted to convey that this keeps happening and happening and happening and happening. And I would hate to say that we're tired of talking about these stories, but we've only talked about 6 for now, 6 or 7, and think about how many happen, how often, how in and out parents have to lose their children because of the myths and the misunderstandings that we have about our black males and women as well. But that's really the point that we wanted to drive home with giving you all of these, and not even a percentage of these stories that we have to confront.
A couple more. Raheem Brown. Anybody heard about Raheem Brown? Show of hands. Nobody did. Okay. Did we have a group here?
Yeah. I was in this group. What I found most striking about this one, I never heard this story was the fact that it was the school district's police And personally, I come from the suburbs and I taught in rural schools. So the idea of school district police being armed was rather striking and alarming to me. And I couldn't actually wrap my head around the fact that you would need armed guards in a school. On top of that, all of these shots, he took 2 shots to the head for holding a screwdriver. I don't know on what planet that a screwdriver equates 2 shots in the head. It's definitely not the universe that I inhabit. So it was very disheartening to hear that he took all of the, let that one go. I got very angry learning about this case.
Glad, thank you for that motion, thank you for that. Did you want to share anything?
That's fine.
Okay. Did anyone else want to respond to this one? If this was something that was new and fresh to you, did you want to respond to this?
Was Stewart the police officer?
Stewart was the eyewitness.
Oh, the eyewitness.
Right, so Stewart was the eyewitness. The question was, who was Stewart? In the last bullet there, Stewart was the eyewitness that said that the ignition, that there was a screwdriver in the ignition, of course, to start the car, and that screwdriver never left the ignition to make it as a weapon. So this young man had lost his life even though there was supposedly a threat that the screwdriver was used as a weapon, but the eyewitness said that it wasn't. But then when they found out who the eyewitness was to defend the young man in court, he was badly beaten.
Oh, can I just make a point to something that you said earlier in front, when you spoke about the fact that the school district police were armed. I feel like I work with a lot of the schools in the South Bronx and in East New York. And if you go to any of those high schools, public high schools, it is a police system. Because some of the schools I have to go through 2 sets of to walk through. So every day those kids are subjected to being prisoned and in their learning institution. And so that understanding that there's a law enforcement that enforces power, which makes them powerless, which denigrates them into nothingness, happens every time. So they go out for lunch, they come through, they have to go twice, they have to take off their belts. You know how you feel when you go through these things at the freaking airport. What if every single day you walk into your school 2 or 3 times, and every single time you get yelled at, you get bullied, you get pushed, you get shoved, your things get searched, you get patted down. Every single time those things are buzzing, you come down every single time. And that kind of unconscious psychosis that then builds around the fact that people build that image of these kids need this. This is the only way they respond to it. And so the young black male is then almost considered animalistic as opposed to human. And I see this on a daily basis when I go into school.
And to piggyback on her point with, excuse me, younger men and women of color, in some cases are in a higher percentage of disciplinary postures within the school system or within the school itself. So that environment in terms of some expectation of being armed to offset some type of violent activity. Also for the stuff that kids do, get into fights, get into arguments, Unfortunately, they're going to talk back to a teacher or something like that, but the overwhelming response to that type of behavior now also, I think attributes to the criminalization of the children, especially in a learning, institution or environment. So, just...
Yeah, because they don't get put in the corner or given a timeout. They're manhandled.
You're suspended. You're suspended for longer periods of time. So, and if there is a mom and dad or a grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle or something like that, while you're at school, while you're missing class time, okay, well then that reads into, that's less education that you're getting. And also, is that being made up at some point, at the end of a vacation period or the school year or something, or do you just miss out? Now, if that's the case, then okay, now you're even further disadvantaged. And that cycle, moves into an adult age where that can, contribute to, okay, well, you're already familiar with this already. So that school to prison pipeline, you're, what is it, third or fourth grade?
Third grade.
That thing is already in play. So now the mechanism is already in play. And the older that you get, should you get out of high school and make it into a college or some other quote-unquote higher learning institution, these messages are being sent by the institution,
Right.
not by social media and anything else, but the institution is saying this.
And let's look at the fourth myth. So 1/3 of black boys will serve time in prison. I taught, much like you, I taught in Washington, D.C., preschool through 8th grade. They went through a metal detector every morning. And if you think about the level of education that they were receiving, and the fact that they had to go through a metal detector every day, they were treated like prisoners every day. They were treated as if they had done something wrong every single day. You think about, well, to me at least, I started to think about the school as not a school, it's not a place of education and, trying to progress yourself, but this is a holding cell. So from 7:45 until 4 o'clock, you're being held here under surveillance. Literally, every single floor had a security guard, an armed security guard. And if you try to make a move or a misstep outside of the parameters that they give you, the little black line that they give you to walk on, like we hear about, then you're out, or you're in detention, or you're suspended. The United States Department of Education just came out with a report that said that disproportionately to any other race, African American boys are suspended, expelled. These are things that we have to think about. And we have to combat this, not just in this room, but outside. We're all at TC, we're all in education, we're teachers, we're practitioners. How are we going to take this and utilize it out there?
Sure. I wanted to add to what you said about school to prison pipeline. When it comes on to, like my daughter, she went to, from elementary, pre-K, elementary, kindergarten, all that stuff. One of the big issues when it comes on to is bullying. The DOE has a tracking system where they track the youth behavior based upon the amount of punishment they get. And it all depends on what the school policy has for the behavior modification within that school. So within the DOE tracking system, they track that kid all the way from pre-K kindergarten all the way to middle to a high school. But also, there's also a difference also when they reach from middle school of where they decide, not to say where they decide, but where they are able to go because they have tracking to say, all right, cool. This young man, because of his behavior, can't able to go into this school, although he's well educated or such, but because he has behavior issues, he's then say, all right, cool, I'm going to put him down on 129 in Amsterdam, which is about 3 high school and 2 middle school within one building.
Yeah.
And as you walk through the doors, even you might be a visitor, you're asked to put your bag through a tracking system and all that stuff. And so as she says, these kids walk through that system. But as I say, school to prison pipeline is that sometimes based upon the young man or young woman's behavior, they put these young women within that school, and so it's overcrowded with, we call it bad behavior youth. And so it becomes a policy aspect of how we then keep that prison as watching schools.
So we're going to move on. I see the hands. We're going to come back to it when we go back to the myths. Okay, I know it's pretty warm and we do have this room for a little bit while. So let's continue on, but we'll definitely come back to the hands. I saw the hands, so we'll come back to it, okay?
Bang, bang.
Bang, bang.
So our group had Diallo, and I'm going to ask the brother over here to share his perspective.
Hi, I'm Chris Sherrill, first-year master's here in sociology and education. I think I may be better to stand up. I won't speak very loudly. We were talking about this idea of kind of the historical context within the black community broadly defined. I mean, when you're looking at the current state of affairs, and I'm sorry if I'm passive here, black pathology, the pathology of blackness, or I would say the melanin count that you may have, if we take it to that kind of aesthetic and not even the cultural ties to that, is that you're not given the benefit of the doubt. You off jump are considered to be violent. to be someone or something in any way. Someone made a very great point about the detachment of humanity, I think, and that was a grand point. But considering the kind of contemporary understanding of a lack of humanity within Black culture broadly defined, you can see that over the 250, 350 plus year history of Black placement in America. You look at the historical context and compare it to what you're saying now. I'm not going to say that doesn't have a pretty significant kind of relevancy here, considering the context and the lack of import in kind of the majority's eyes within the realm of Black life.
Thank you, Chris. There was a response.
Just to further that point, I think that this speaks not only to myths about Black men, but myths about Black communities. I'm from the Bronx, I remember this very well. And I think to speak to the third point, when the Justice Department, or when they decided not to pursue charges, that was actually removed from the Bronx and sent to like Levittown, New York or something. And so that speaks to the fact that people from outside of the city have perceptions of what it's like to live in the Bronx, and therefore excuse the behaviors of officers because their perception of the West Bronx, the South Bronx, is that, well, it's a violent place. If I worked there, if I were a cop there, I'd probably shoot 41 times as well, because they don't know the community that they speak of.
Thank you. I think as we move forward, we're not going to get into the myths, but thank you, Chris, for giving us a segue of thinking about this pathology that really permeates in our society, that perpetuates this idea that Black males aren't afforded the same opportunity as other boys, as other girls, even all students, because of this perception, this narrative that we've accepted in our society. Because even though everyone in this room is interested in ways that we could change and reframe it, there's at some point we accepted that as the status quo. I know I have, so I'm going to be open about that. That I thought that perhaps my Black brother could be an enemy to me at one time. I thought I could be an enemy to myself, even. And I think this pathology has really put me in a place where now that I'm able to articulate how it has affected me, that I really want to find ways in which that we can eliminate this from our society, eradicate this idea that Black males are not what we think they are, that they're not academic capable, that they're not capable of raising a family or having a family, and they're not capable of being able to engage in the civil liberties that we all take for granted. All of us in this space have been given second chances. All of us in this space have been able to overcome certain obstacles in our lives. We need to give our Black boys the same opportunity. So let's get into the myths and hit them head on. We really want you to think critically about where do you think this myth comes from, and how do you think we can change this narrative, switch it? You all are experts in this room. You all have thought about these ideas prior to, hopefully. If not, this is your first time, please give me what comes to your mind. So we can really find a way, and we could use this space as an open space to try to find a collective way to change this narrative.
And in the interest of time, so we have the room until about 8:30 for discussion, and then 8:30 to 9 o'clock we'll kind of mix and mingle a little bit. So in the interest of time, we're going to go through the myths, and we're just going to talk about our own personal experiences. So there are practitioners in here, there are obviously Black males, there are Black females in here, and then there are other people that are just advocates, like we said, for educational excellence. And so as we're going through each of the myths, if it's something that surprises you, if it's something that you've noticed in your own situation, maybe in your own practitioner, feel free to shout it out. This is supposed to be a very informal discussion.
One note, the reason why yes, there should be more copies, maybe. Just one note about the article that we're reading, so you can have some background. The article was written by Ivory Tosin. He was a Howard University professor, but he's actually he's the executive director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. It's one of the older White House initiatives, and he's also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Legal Education. So he's really engaged in these conversations. He's been so for so many years, and so we're really thankful to be able to have this opportunity to talk about it, and it's because of Ivory. So just want to make sure that we understood where these ideas are coming from, and where we can look for future reference, okay? So you do have a snapshot of the article, but it is available online and we can get that to you.
And also, one more thing, in the interest of time as well, as we're going through each of the myths, we're going to give you just a snapshot of some of the facts that we have found associated with the myths. So we might not actually facilitate that conversation, but this is very good information for you to know as we're going through each of the myths. Okay.
So can someone just share out for us this one myth, the first myth, excuse me, the first myth, to share it out.
There are more black men in prison than in college.
So today, there are approximately 600,000 more black men in college than in jail, and the best research evidence suggests that the line was never true to begin with. Let's talk about it.
Has everyone heard that there are more black men in prison than in college? Where do you think that came from? From the media?
I think we, as our community, perpetuate it. You know, I'm sure I've thought it and I've said it until, as of recently, they started doing those video blurbs and they're writing the books behind it, and I was able to get real statistics, but we don't have the facts. No one's really collecting them. No one's really sharing them in one place where you could go. You might get myth one here, wrong fact, and then get another thing that's right, that's factual, but I don't know how to tie them together. So I think being able to go someplace and see it all together.
That is so key, just real quick. Us being in this space, we're practitioners, but also researchers. And we also need to question the research that is put out there, because a lot of it can be framed in a way that is not accurate. And a lot of tests and a lot of surveys do not show accurate information. So I'm glad that you brought it up, but it's our job here to question and challenge those things.
What I really want to point out is, personally, I don't think we challenge things and do research. So amongst ourselves, I call out a fact and say there's more men in jail or whatever, but when I want to go to work with everyone else, I'm going to do my due diligence. And I think it serves us all to just do our due diligence before we start speaking and think before we speak on anything.
Now, why is it that you think that we just accept what the media says and we just accept it as truth? Because we know, like, images of black people, images of women, images of minorities in the media are often false. So, and most of us know this. Why do you think we don't challenge it?
I think subconsciously he's been speaking to just being in an environment that kind of pushes down and perpetuates and kind of lends to it. So you almost I think it's natural for a lot of people to speak from habit and actually really think about what they're saying. And again, we're talking casually, personally, and I think that's where some of the things come out. And then you might have the people who don't really talk a lot, and then they kind of carry it on. And so the people who actually are the drivers or the leaders or the kind of thought people in a personal setting kind of set the tone for the people who might not. And so if I'm in a room and I'm saying something, I kind of tend to be around that space where people would take what I say and kind of run with it versus challenging me to be like, did you check that? So.
Also, I think that, and this shouldn't be a surprise to many, that it's juicy and it's bite-sized and it's easy to remember. So you made me think of, I bought a book a while ago called The African American Man in College by Couget, and I think that was like his tagline. Like, to sell that book, it makes sense to be like, just remember, there are more black men in prison than in college, and so you store it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I heard that somewhere. And it tags along with the other one about serving time in prison. I mean, Amanda and I advise Barnard students, so these are 18 to 21-year-olds, and they must regurgitate that fact all the time, and I'm calling it a fact, because until now I thought it was a fact.
Yes.
And so I think it's easy to store, remember, and yeah, it just makes things easier to kind of, it's for a cause, sometimes beneficial. You want to get people invited in the conversation, but other times it's just catchy and it gets the news on.
Thank you. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
The importance of, I think it's so critical to underscore how media, particularly mainstream white media, has inculcated the ideas of not only how more African American men are incarcerated, but everything else we've been talking about. So that when people get up in the morning and the first thing that they do is turn on the television or listen to the radio or whatever it is, people are constantly bombarded with the message that well, now they don't say a black man, they say a person, they show the picture, if you watch television, did such and such a crime. That's the lead story in a lot of the news programs, so that when people are constantly bombarded with this day in and day out, all throughout the day, you come away with an idea that this must be true because the media is presenting, not knowing, or some people not realizing that this is all planned and scripted and done intentionally to create a mindset within people that this is what this person does who looks like this. So consequently, so if a statistic is thrown up that more people are incarcerated, why African American people are incarcerated, African Americans are incarcerated, then it will believe it because the images that are viewed day in and day out seem to bear that out. So the impact of the media is just so pervasive that.
Then there was a couple more hands. I see the new hands. So
I want to add on to that. So I think that the story of blackness is so carefully conscripted, right? It's been so carefully written and designed, not just through the media, but through the history annals, through the policymakers in the country, through the way cities and towns and things are structured, right? It's very, very, very well structured in our heads. The same way whiteness is constructed so that we can think that that's a normative state for us to be in. And so when we think about the fact that these are constructed norms or understandings in our head, my response to that is that we have to be very deliberate in our deconstruction of that structures. And so how we go about changing those myths, how we go about changing the thought patterns in our own heads, in our own minds. I'm born and raised in apartheid South Africa, so I know how that kind of thing can work on a majority of people in a country dominated by 10% of the population. So it costs like really deep thought and understanding and very deliberate action. And so I think when we think about blackness as a construct, it's the same as whiteness as a construct being normative. And so we have to start.
okay. Barney will talk about the consequences. Does anyone want to share out the second myth?
Black boys can't read. My name is Donald Jones, and I come from Rutgers University in New Jersey. I will get my master's in August in urban and engineering education with a specialization on cognitive rhetoric. This topic speaks especially to me. Number one must think when you talk about the social cognitive construct of writing amongst African American males, such as myself, video games, certain variables within the urban community like poor diet, bad role models, always watching the TV or VHS or DVD or anything like that. So, but the big thing about it is when it comes to that myth, you really have to really analyze, in terms of reading, because there's more illiterate white boys than black boys, one. Two, most importantly, the way I became such a great writer and a poet and a novelist and all that jazz is because, more sometimes if you have certain disabilities like dyslexia or ADHD, you can listen better and auditory senses can help you decipher the words. Good example, Nas's Illmatic in 1994. I learned explicative paraphrase through AZ and Nas on Life's a Bitch. Excuse my language. But, that's the way I learned. So using literacy as a discourse, especially in New York City where you have Children's Matinee Workshop, Children's Television Workshop, using literacy as a social advocacy, those types of things. And that's also dependent on where you're at. There's social hegemonies and powers that be that control who learns what. Especially, I went to undergrad at Ohio State, which was extremely segregated by surprise. And me going through that and looking at the miseducation of the African American, especially the African American male, and so bad into a slave institutional mind that, it kind of took me back. I was from the East Coast. So going back to myth number 2 about black boys can't read, it really depends on where you're at. In New York City, big time book sale, but you go to the Midwest or the South, it's all about Superman or, grills or how much money you have. So it really just depends on, number one, community advocacy and place-based pedagogy. But that's just
I will echo that sentiment about advocacy and engagement in the community. I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, and something that was so... Did you go to Morehouse?
No, I taught at Morehouse.
Oh, you taught at Morehouse, okay. So I've seen brother. Started to get very excited. But one of the things that I saw in the community was that we had a community of 3, 4 institutions, brilliant minds, but we did very little to engage our community, and that's just the reality of it. And so, a few of us did, a few people did, but why isn't it that, it wasn't an institutionalized practice for us to go out and engage our community? So I am going to echo that thought coming from Sal, coming from Spelman.
I think we should move a little bit forward. I know that there's some myths in there that we've talked about a little bit more in depth. If we can share out myth number 6, I think that's something that we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's really, really important that we get to it before going forward. So myth number 6. I know it's not numbered, but we can just count to 6.
Oh, God.
Can someone share that out for me, please? Anyone?
Basically, black students disengage from school because they feel like academic success equates with acting white. Which is actually really interesting because when John Ubu did his study, his participants didn't mention anything about academic success equating to acting white. So it's kind of interesting to think, like, how did that narrative get attached and why is that around today when his participants didn't even make that, didn't state those words?
What did they say?
I don't know. Sorry, that's one thing. I read this, they used the word what?
Brainiacs, which apparently also
Well,
is
that's
supposed to be
like-
some type of...
But that has
Yeah.
white connotation to it.
Yeah, but when you think about it, the word brainiac, that's prevalent in youth culture in general. Where it's like, oh, look at the nerdy kids, oh, look at that. It's like, when in this moment and why did that automatically become racialized?
White thing.
Yeah.
Was through Ogbu and Fordham study.
Yeah, that's what I'm
where
saying,
it
but, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And
Like,
it just took on a life of its own.
yeah, that's the thing, I think the questioning, like, why is it taking a life of its own? Why do people readily accept, like, oh yeah, that is why black kids aren't achieving? It's
Because
they
it's
think
it's
acting
sexy. It's like
Exactly. It
Yeah.
builds off of a lot of what we're talking about with like this dominant discourse of like, oh, black students underachieve because they're acting white. But let's not look at institutionalized structures. Let's not look at the process of schooling that pushes these kids out of school.
Except for I would say that just because something's a myth and not true doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So there are plenty of circumstances where high achieving black students, particularly males, are told you're acting white. People are told that, and it is often people within the same race who are either envious, jealous, or underachieving, or not as smart, or whatever it might be. So the fact that people actually say that, I've worked with a lot of very high achieving students of color. And a lot of them, they did not purposely overachieve. So I think that's the piece of the myth, that high performing students don't purposely underachieve. But there is a stigma to being an overachiever. So the piece of this that's the myth is that the black students are underachieving. Now, I think that is untrue. They are achieving, but it is not a myth that they are criticized for acting white.
Well, I definitely want to engage in this conversation with you and take it to a different step and say that with the whole idea of the bullying that you're alluding to that happens often in black communities, it happens not because it simply exists because it exists, but I would argue that it exists because of this pathology that has permeated in our society that continues to perpetuate that behavior. And I think that when we look at what is happening and we try to articulate the circumstances behind it, I think it's very important that we give the context as to why these things come about in the first place. And I think to your point, you were saying that, yes, that comes a lot out of some research, and we run with it because it feels good, like you said, it's catchy, right?
But I would say that it isn't. I think that like many things, when something happens in the context of people of color, people pathologize it, and the media will play it up and all that,
Sure.
right? But the reality is, if you go into any school, you go into, let's say, a predominantly white school, the high-performing students are going to be accused of being nerds.
Right.
If you go into any kind of school, the high-performing children are always teased. So why is it that they're not saying that white students are underachieving when there are 90% more of them? underachieving, predominantly white school, when you might say that there's like the top 10, 15% of the children, right? And everybody else is not doing well, but those high-performing students there are being just as teased as in any other setting.
Right, there's two comments that we're going to respond to you, I think.
One of the things that I think also is a part of this myth is the question of who is celebrated for being quote-unquote educated. And it goes a part of the potential reality that I think you're trying to get at with the African white theory is there's this thing called tracking that happens in schools that we all know about. Who is at the top? Who is in those AP courses and who isn't? Is it because they actually can't do the work in those AP courses? Or is because that would play into the myth, and that would make the myth real. But I don't think that's what we believe it to actually be. That there are some other qualities that allow you to get into these AP courses. And one of those qualities is you look a certain way. You talk a certain way.
And that started in first grade, right?
Right.
So by the time you're in ninth grade, you've already been pushed forward and considered smart. And
Profile.
Right.
So there's this idea of what is educated in the first place, and how much diversity, how much space for diversity is there in that idea of who is educated and what does an educated person look like.
So I think in terms of where this acting white phrase came from, so Fordham and Abu got a lot of pushback because they used that and it actually hadn't been what their participants had said, but they responded by saying that if you look at the socializing nature of schools, what kids are being taught how to do is to assimilate into white dominant culture. And so in certain kids' minds, it was by taking on these attitudes and actions and learning your way, I am being trained into how to act white, which is discounting my culture, who I am, my identity, and what I'm bringing to the table. And so that's where the acting white piece comes in, where we have to say this is something that's happening. It might not be in the way that the myth is traditionally discussed, but it's something that is happening, which is why you have lots of Billings and Delpit and all these people talking about the need for cultural development, which is now changing into culturally sustaining pedagogies, where we're recognizing we have to expand our definition of what an educated human being looks like in this country. So yeah, this myth is, I think, misconstrued and in the way that it's discussed. And it actually perpetuates the idea that there is like a white way to learn and a black way to learn and this and that, but you have to get to the root of that and say like, that is happening. So how can we change the discourse around it so that we're not perpetuating it?
So I definitely agree with a lot of the comments that have been said. And one thing that I've noticed in a lot of the comments is that this intertwined with media. And when I was a junior at Howard University,
say it.
My project, for my spring semester, the end of my spring semester, was the ideology of Steve Urkel. And what I did was I asked 200 African American males on my campus of what they thought of Steve Urkel and if they identified with Steve Urkel and what they wanted to be like Steve Urkel. Steve Urkel, as most of you all know if you've seen Family Matters, was a very, very hilarious but super intelligent African American male on television. And I think that with the thought of Steve Urkel, I think a lot of people, especially me growing up in that era, I thought being smart meant being nerdy. And I didn't want to identify with that. I wanted to be smart. I wanted to get good grades because my mother was expecting that when I came home, good grades. But at the same time, I didn't want to be that nerd. And so when I was asking all these different, when I asked the series of questions to 200 African American males on my campus, they all said the same exact thing. They did not want to associate with what Steve Urkel represented. And one thing that I wanted to say really quickly, and I wasn't able to say it earlier, but I'll just kind of like try to throw it in here real quick, is that being someone who works for media is driven by money. It is a very capitalist, very selfish, and very focused society, where if I put this information out there, it's going to gain me something, which is revenue. It's going to get me money. If you put this information out there and you get a good following and you get viewers, then that means more ad sales, which means more money in my pocket, and then everybody's going on vacation. And one thing that I know, I don't know who watches Fox News in here, but Fox News
will amuse me.
Okay. Well, Fox News is one of the most criticized. It's one of the most criticized news organizations in this country, but it has the highest ratings of any news organization. Okay, and people wonder. They say, why? I don't understand. Like, we have this really diverse country. We have all these different people in this country. Why is this happening? And the one thing that people need to realize is that within every myth, with every myth that I see in here, there is some type of truth in every myth. With every stereotype, there is some type of truth. And so when you have a group of people, which is at the time, I believe, what is his name? Bill O'Reilly's show is getting 1.9 million viewers at the moment. When you have people who want to hear this type of stuff, who want to see these type of images on their TV screen, of course it's going to be pushed. Of course. It's like it's a no-brainer. So I think back to the original question, acting white and identifying with being smart. I think that we need to look in our own communities. My mom used to always tell me you have to clean up your own house before you work out in the yard. And I think that we need to work together and start building each other up rather than tearing each other down. I'll reference last summer, they call it the Bloody Fourth, where 72 youth in Chicago were shot down within 3 days of 4th of July. And it's ridiculous. How can we, I think the real question that we need to start asking ourselves, and I ask myself this every single day, is how can we make a difference within our own community? Whether it be one person, whether it be two people, how can we do it? How can we do it? And I'll leave with that.
That's a good question. We're going to have to move on, but I do see your hand, and please continue the conversation in other spaces as well. The only thing that I want to leave you guys with before we move away from this myth is to really speak to your point. Fox does a great job of really getting viewers. I heard recently on Fox that they called UConn the NAACP 2014 champions. If you don't know, UConn won the NCAA 2014. So they do play on the sexy. But before we leave this myth, I want to give you something. Rosalind Mickelson, she's a researcher. And she actually has research that's contrary to John Abu's and Pierre Fryer's research about the idea that there's an attitude achievement paradox among black adolescent males. And what she has found, even though we do have our own personal stories about how education, within education, especially as a black male, that high achievement is something that is sometimes frowned upon. That does happen, and there is bullying. I'm going to acknowledge that. However, there is within our communities a high regard for academic achievement and academic success. I don't know any parent in here who didn't tell their son or their daughter to do well academically. And I think that we really need to hone in as to the other conversations that are happening and not just be able to regurgitate or talk about those that dominate the conversation. John Abu dominates the conversation. I haven't heard about Rosalind Mickelson until I read the article, and I wanted to learn more about why he thought it was a myth in the first place. So if you do have an opportunity, please write down that name. If you want to know more about what she writes about, please definitely find her, and I could be of a resource as well.
And also, just 5 seconds, I think that education is a symbol of hope. And so teaching, I taught high school students in Philadelphia. I had a child say to me, after 3 weeks of what I thought were wonderful lessons, Miss Washington, this is great and all, but everybody knows that you have to be white to succeed. And I think that that, to me, beyond a story, beyond a theory, beyond an article, tells me that we really need to get into the minds of our students. And so you can have the parents say, you can do well, you can go to college, you can succeed. But what do those students think of themselves? What do they think about their progression within their communities? I think that that's another thing that we need to start thinking about as practitioners.
Can I just add something there? Because I actually do career and professional development. My background is diversity and inclusion, recruiting, and I've worked at Box 5 companies, Citigroup and NYU, and I'm now with her at Harlem Children's Zone. You can tell the students that they can be great, but when it's time for them to get the job, there's also additional challenges that you have to get to, and that's why someone like me needs to be on that side. And so I think as you continue to build on this, I think, as you're growing them to where they meet me, which is why I was interested, you really want to think about this, because there are ceilings that they hit, and we need to break through them.
Everybody get this card.
Where do those sets come from?
Ivory Tosin, of course. If you go to the article online, you can always hit read more on the myth itself, and he has that on his website. So
also on the handout on the bottom, under the source,
there it is.
we just put exactly where we got it.
Okay. Thanks.
yes, I'm not sure exactly what source he has it. I know he didn't do it himself, but we can get
But
that
you can
information.
source him
Yeah,
and
sure.
his sources.
And also a lot of it comes from the Breaking Barriers report that he wrote as well, which is sourced in here.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure. So I think we're going to move on to our last myth that we're going to be able to get to today. I know it's 8:30 now, so I would be really remiss if I didn't talk about this myth, number 7. Can someone share it out, please?
Put it on screen.
Well, I think someone's copying it down, but you should all have it.
Black males are
They aren't
avoiding.
going into education, they aren't going into teaching.
Yes.
And as a professor of education, at the College of New Jersey, in my 6 years there, I have seen 3 African-American males in our teacher education program. Only one has graduated today.
Thank you for that.
But I see plenty of African-American males on campus.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you're saying, there's a lot of teacher education programs. Everybody, and hey, you want to be a teacher, you want to give back to the community. One thing you have to understand is that within these teacher education programs, within the teacher profession itself, a lot of black males do want to become teachers and get involved with the community and get involved. The problem of it is black males getting used to the teacher's lounge, black males dealing with the fact, and it's still a problem today of teaching actually being a profession as opposed to an occupation dominated by females. You know what I mean? So that's another thing you have to understand right there. And number 3, what I experienced at OSU was the social discriminatory and racial tone of the educational establishment itself. Because I had a lot of great ideas and where I wanted, my teacher philosophy to go, and people were just like, well, that's not what we want. We're focusing more on this type of education. We're not really focusing on this type of education. And it kind of creates a backlash. You have to understand that schools are treated like businesses nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
The majority of them anyway. And it's setting kids up to be good employees and not employers. It's not a consortium for enlightenment. So it is treated like a business. So I have a choice to choose. Do I go against my own will and play this teacher bureaucracy game where I'm being watched at all times, and even if my own people may not even have my back because of the teachers union and the privatizers coming in and they want to do their thing, where do I go? Do I go for the educational enlightenment approach or do I go for the submission approach? So it puts me at a paradox.
Just thank you for that. I would like somebody, if you don't mind, just to read out the myth buster that he has right underneath, because I was startled. Not startled, I was surprised to see that. Anyone? I'll read it.
Primary school teacher is the #1 profession of college-educated black men and #3 for white men. Secondary school teacher is #5 for black men and #14 for white men. Educational administrator is #6 for black men and #20 for white men, and counselor is #7 for black men and #40 for white men.
Let's go to that first sentence very quickly. I was very surprised, and like I said, Tolson has all of his research outlined, but the primary school teacher is the #1 profession of college-educated black men.
I cannot
Surprising.
I'm not surprised, I see it a lot.
Yeah.
So did he clarify to say it was like the actual #1 profession or the #1 choice? Right? Because if these stats, to me, they don't seem to say very much, because in reality, white men have more employment choices than black people. So, you know, a white man can be a CEO. Of course, he doesn't want to be a teacher. Like, for what?
Yeah.
So, to me, these stats don't.
It's just to add to that, stats actually show that the top 3 reasons why black men don't enter the teaching profession on a more continual basis is one, lack of support, us being viewed as the breadwinners of our families and the actual income being too low, and fear of some sort of harassment from a student, male or female. And being a former educator myself, the issue wasn't, well, the issues were all three. Well, the harassment piece I wasn't worried about, but the income piece was a problem, and the support piece was a problem. And I worked in schools where my administrators were African American. But I had an administrator approach me one day and ask me why I was talking to my kids who were predominantly, I had a predominantly black and Dominican student population. I had a principal come in my room and approach me and ask me why I was talking about the death of Coretta Scott King as opposed to sticking to my lesson plans. And I said to her, and we really got into it during our one-on-one, because I said, as a black woman, I don't see why this is a conversation. You should understand why, as a black man, I'm talking to black kids about one of the top women of the civil rights movement. And no, I'm sorry, I didn't plan for Coretta Scott King to die today. But when I came into the I thought it was relevant that I speak to these young people about current events and things that they could relate to, because when I mentioned her name to them, they couldn't tell me who Coretta Scott King was, because this is not a conversation that they hear on a daily basis. So the support piece is really big, is that black men are not being supported, or when you go into these predominantly white schools where white women are predominantly in the teaching force, there is a certain model, there is a certain manner and methodology and pedagogy that's being expected, that's being equated to top quality teaching. And when you try to combat that or insert your own level of creativity to change the atmosphere of your classroom, you get a lot of pushback. And a lot of times you get pushed out all the way.
I want to go back to
There's a couple of comments over here.
very quickly. I just wanted to talk about your point real quick. I think that that's a wonderful point, and one of the reasons why we have to delve into the statistics. But I think that the thing that was surprising is that we're told that there are no black teachers. At least I am. I'm told that black teachers don't exist. Black primary teachers, black kindergarten teachers that are males are non-existent. And so for this statistic, by choice or otherwise, for them to be #1, I think that that's something that we, really need to look into. But your point is well received.
But I think if you look at the, where they go into the profession, do they stay? Because I think that, I very much agree with him, I think that maybe #1 choice of profession initially, but unfortunately they don't stay in the profession.
A lot of black males they stay in the profession, but they transition from the classroom into administration because that's where the money is.
So there's 2 more comments, and then we're going to move on into what we could do about it very quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time. We also want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts about the conversation that we had today. There's consent forms. We have a videographer that could also assist in that process. So without further ado, if we could have those 2 comments and then move on into what we can do about it.
Yeah, like yourself, I don't believe this fact as well. I went to PWI, so I graduated from UC Berkeley, and if I talk to my black community, I have one black professor there. But I think what's really interesting is that even with that black professor that I had, a black male, we as a black community was very critical of him. So we kind of criticized, why is he teaching like this? We're not really learning. This is an easy A class. So it's like, how as we as a black community, why are we doing that to our own community? So I really thought that was interesting, because there's so many levels to just this quote unquote myth. So yeah.
Thank you.
To the sister who says Rutgers, right?
No, I'm at Felician College.
Just a question more on, did it ever been researched of how many black males applied to the educational program and how many got accepted
Oh, there you go.
as a choice of the college?
I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure they probably, no one has done research on that. But, well, I can attest to the fact that the requirements to become a teacher, as more people of color go in, decide to choose education as a career path, the requirements to become a teacher are becoming more stringent. For instance, in New Jersey, they're raising the GPA to a 3.0.
Yeah.
The number of gatekeepers, the number of high-stakes standardized tests are increasing. Also, the amount that these tests cost. We have students that are failing repeatedly by 1 point. Now, it's not just us. It's also majority students as well. So it's interesting to see this dynamic. I've been in education now for 20-something years, and it's interesting to see these dynamics playing out. And I'm afraid, I have a 7-year-old son, and I'm watching him almost become one of these statistics, as he has a teacher that does not know how to relate to black boys. And one of the reasons why I went from being a principal to going into higher education, because I was seeing the kind of teachers that were going into classrooms, and I was afraid for our students of color. So I wanted to be able to touch and reach out to these pre-service teachers' minds so that they didn't continue to miseducate our children.
Thank you for your service. Wow.
Just on a note to leave us with, we ask ourselves, why are we here? Why are we at Teachers College? Sometimes I ask myself, what will I do after Teachers College? I think that as we started with talking about some of the severe implications of African American men, let's think about the African American men that we have that are striving, that are doing wonderful, and they're still having to combat some of the myths that are in academic success. So just take this with you, take these names, these stories with you, and be encouraged, because we're all in this together. Thank you.
So something that was really powerful tonight about talking about myths with black men, and particularly black youth in education, was this idea of the fact that black youth, and a lot of the examples that we talked about, especially with people like Trayvon Martin and boys like Ramarley Graham, was the idea that there was a threat. Hi, I'm Dominic Walker. I'm a first-year master's student in the Sociology and Education program. And something that I found interesting tonight about the 9 myths about black men and academic success, and the examples that they used with Ramarley Graham and Trayvon Martin, was the idea that black men in particularly have this idea of threat placed on them on a foundation that on its face is false. And talking about that foundation is powerful if we hope to make any changes about how we talk about black youth in general, particularly black youth in education.
My name is Courtney Rose. I am a first-year doctoral student in the Curriculum and Teaching Department here at TC. And tonight's event, I think, was the start of a really crucial conversation that needs to happen in institutions like TC, where we say our mission is to start to debunk a lot of these myths that are out there and that are holding back our black and Latino boys and groups of other minorities. And so I think it was a great way to get people to start thinking about the things that we ourselves have even internalized and are carrying with us in our work in order to push forward and beyond them, and to think about what is truth and what is just maybe things that have been passed on as truth that we have been carrying as truth. So great event, and I really hope the conversation keeps going and people take this back into their classes, their jobs, and their homes, because as we talked about today, it starts with us, and then we can push it outward.
Hello, my name is Daniel Harris, and I'm a student here at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm studying sociology and education, and I was just co-facilitating the 9 Myths About Black Males and Academic Success event that was hosted here today. It was a phenomenal event. We were really able to engage in the critical conversations about black males and what we can do about being able to support them in their academic pursuits. I believe that that is one area in which our society really needs to think hard and consciously about what we can do to really allow our young people to get to a place where they're actualizing their potential and they're able to really engage in the civil liberties that they all deserve. So again, my name is Daniel, and I was very thankful to have a wonderful turnout today. There was wonderful thoughts, great energy, and I really think that I myself left inspired to continue to engage in the conversations, but more importantly in the work that is very necessary for young people. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Washington. I am a master's student in sociology. Oh, can we cut that? Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm not actually in sociology. I've been introducing Daniel all day. That's not my program.
Okay. I was at take 2, so the attitude, take 2.
Hello, my name is Amanda Washington. I'm a master's student in the Education and Policy program here at Teachers College. We had an event tonight that really was just a pre-event, pre-conference discussion about the myths of African American males and in society. To me, it was a wonderful conversation. I gleaned a lot from the experts that were in the room, and also we looked a lot at Ivory Tolson's work about 9 myths of African American males in 9 myths of African American males in education and their academic success. Wonderful conference, wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing our work. My name is Amanda Washington. I'm a master's student in the Education Policy and Social Analysis program here at TC. I really enjoyed tonight's conversation. We had a discussion about the 9 myths of African American males in academic success that was really birthed from the report that Ivory Tolson just came out with, the Breaking Barriers report. It was a wonderful conversation, a wonderful event, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation here at TC. Thank you.